Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to OpenView's webinar series. My name is Liz Kane, and I'm the VP of Go-to-Market here at OpenView. For those of you who may not know OpenView, we're a venture capital firm based in Boston that focuses on expansion stage software companies and help them to acquire, retain, and grow the right customers and talent. You can find out more on our website at openviewpartners.com. Today's webinar is on structuring your customer success team and how to measure ROI. Joining us for the presentation is Allison Pickens, the Vice President of Customer Success and Business Ops at Gainsight. Her organization at Gainsight includes all post-sale functions, including customer success managers, support, onboarding, services, and operations. She's broadly recognized as an expert on customer success strategy, and we're lucky to have her here today. Just a few quick housekeeping items before I turn it over to Allison. There will be time for Q&A, and we'll welcome those questions throughout the presentation. As questions come up, please use the chat feature on the left side of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. We will also be circulating the deck and the recording, so please keep an eye out for the email. So with that being said, Allison, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, and great to be here today. Hi, everybody. I'm going to be talking with you today about customer success organizational structure and how to think about the return on investment in your customer success program. I'll probably talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions for about 15 minutes after that. But also, if you have questions along the way, we'll try to take those too. So some of the most advanced companies that we work with tend to think of customer success as a company-wide imperative. So typically, they think of customer success as involving the customer at the center. And then from there, other functions have a very important role in benefiting the customer, but in different ways. For example, your sales team might be responsible for ensuring a solid handoff. Your services team might be responsible for driving fast time to value, not just meeting a certain profit and loss target. Your support team might be responsible for accelerating high-priority tickets or high-risk customers tickets, not just closing as many tickets as they can. Your marketing team might be responsible for identifying customer advocates accurately rather than merely asking anybody who might be actually an at-risk customer for a reference. Your renewals team can create a more targeted renewals experience. Your finance team can be more thoughtful in driving collections. And your product team can really think about not just developing new features, but also incorporating customer feedback into the product roadmap. So I think for many companies, this feels like the end state, right, where every function is truly aligned with the others on how to benefit the customer through their functions activities. Now, this might seem like a dream for a few reasons, but one of them is that this sort of model can lead to there being a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? I'll describe a life cycle that we see as pretty common across the companies that we work with. First of all, you might have a life cycle that looks like this, where a customer comes in the door, you implement them, they start to adopt, and ultimately, if you're successful, they renew with you. Now, there can be a lot of people who are involved along that life cycle. You might have a kickoff call that's run by a project manager in your services team. You might have a customer success manager who then comes in to create a success plan for the customer, marking down their objectives and how you're going to go about achieving them. You might have a training or education department that then goes in and does a training. Someone else does the go live. Then your support team gets involved to address some sort of urgent ticket. Customer success gets involved to do an executive business review, and then sales comes back to actually process the renewal. So this chart tends to look pretty familiar to a lot of companies. And as you can tell from the way it's designed, there can be a lot of people involved along the way, which can be confusing to the customer and also frustrating. They may not know who to go to for help, and it may be that all these folks who are interacting with the customer don't have the same source of information about what's going on, and they're not coordinating their activities. So what do we do about that? That's how we started to. That's sort of the place that we came from when thinking about how to design our organizational structure. So what I'm going to chat with you guys today about is a few different topics. First of all, how we redesigned our organizational structure, particularly in post-sales, to help solve the problem of having too many cooks in the kitchen while at the same time everyone's trying to benefit the customers. Two, how to design an organizational charter. So while we might be an interesting case study. Of course, it's just one data point. My hope is that I can equip all of you to think through your organizational structure in more depth, and I have a framework to think through in order to do that. The third topic is how to define the return on investment in customer success within the context of this organizational structure. And then finally, how do you start to track this ROI over time so that internally, when you're having conversations with your CFO, your CEO, or your board, you can describe with a lot of precision the impact that your team is having. So to start off, how do we redesign our organizational structure? I'll give you a few data points on Gainsight before I dive into this, just so that you have a sense of the context in which we've been working. So Gainsight is a venture-backed company. We have about 400 people spread across a number of different offices, actually around the world. We have grown pretty quickly, so consider ourselves a hyper-growth company. Actually, when I joined 3 years ago, we had about 60 people, so compare that with 400 today. And we're in between 25 and 50 million in revenue. So you can kind of get a sense as to what stage we're in. We're also a SaaS company, which some of the folks on the phone may not be SaaS companies, and that's okay. But you might have a customer success program that resonates with ours. So what I described to you today may not be perfectly applicable to your business, but I will describe some ideas that you should consider as you go about thinking through your own org structure. We started out with a few principles for designing the structure. First of all, we wanted to design it around the customer's needs. So starting out with, what does the customer require from us from an experience standpoint? Then let's determine a set of activities that help fulfill those needs, and then cluster those activities into logical functions that can support the customer. This is actually somewhat of a novel perspective about how to think about organizational structure. So often we start out with, what does our own company need from this group of people? But being a customer success software company, we thought, let's try to push the envelope a little bit and start out with what the customer needs. The second point was ensuring autonomy. I wanted to make sure that every function had full autonomy to deliver on the customer mission that was their responsibility, that they could hire the resources they need, that they could make certain decisions, all in order to support the customer. Third, we wanted to clarify for our customers who to go to for what. Certainly, if it's not clear for us how all of our functions are working together, it's not going to be clear for the customer. We wanted to make it really obvious where the customer could go for help. Then fourth, even though we wanted to ensure a lot of autonomy for each function, we needed to maximize coordination among them. So defining the interdependencies between them was a very important part of this exercise. We started out with 3 different customer needs that would inform our organizational structure. The first was outcomes management. We know that our customers need us to translate their business objectives into return on investment that's an investment that they're making in our software. We then devised a client outcomes function, that's what we call it, to address that customer need. This is actually where our CSMs live. Now, note, this is particularly important. We were very deliberate in calling it client outcomes because the customer success role actually varies pretty significantly across lots of companies. In some places, it's more like a proactive version of support. In other cases, it's more like a technical account manager or other sort of technical resource. In our case, our CSM function is specifically about helping the customer take their strategy and turn it into processes in our product. So we wanted to call that out and call it client outcomes. Secondly, we know our customers need fast time to value. When they first become a customer, they need us to lead a structured process to achieve quickly a set of initial business objectives. That responsibility now falls to the onboarding function. And the third customer need we call solutions on demand. This involves tackling inbound customer challenges. They're going to have questions along the way. They're going to have tricky scenarios they're trying to work through. They need to be able to just send those to us, and we need to be able to address them very, very quickly and effectively. And that's what our technical success function is responsible for. So let me give you a sense of all the functions and how they kind of relate to each other. My title is Customer Success. And there are a few functions that fall within that organization. One is client outcomes. I mentioned CSMs fall under that group. The second was onboarding. In this group, we've got project managers, pretty straightforward, and we have solutions architects who are responsible for thinking through the overall data architecture for the customer's instance of our product. Gainsight is in one respect, a data warehouse in the sense that you're bringing in data from lots of different sources, and you're ensuring that that data, works well together, and that you're able to create, reports and actions and alerts based on it. So we need, a very technical person who can help think through the data structure. Our third function, technical success, includes a few different groups. We've got support. This is pretty traditional support. Customers submit tickets with questions, often about break fix, and we'll, respond quickly to those. We also added a customer success architect team. This team has really taken off this year. They've done incredible work for our customers. These are folks who have a skill set that's somewhat similar to solutions architects, but they're working with customers primarily after onboarding. They might be working in a couple different capacities. One is in managed services. In certain situations where a customer doesn't have the resources internally to manage their own instance of Gainsight, they can outsource that administration to a customer success architect. And secondly, when certain support tickets tend to be a little too involved, maybe it'll take 10 hours to actually help the customer design certain workflows in the product, a customer success architect or CSA will get involved there. And finally, our training and education group falls under technical success. They're responsible for, among other things, ensuring that we have the materials available to help address those inbound customer challenges. And then finally, we have two different internal-facing groups. One is customer success operations. They're tasked with ensuring that we are finding scalable ways to create an amazing client experience. They're working across the three customer-facing functions on the left to ensure that they're all working together well, and that's, again, in a scalable way, they're doing great work for customers. This group manages all of our data, particularly in Gainsight, our own instance of Gainsight. They help design processes to ensure that we're scalable, and they also manage certain scalable programs like our online community, my blog, and certain other best practices programs. Then finally, services operations live side by side with customer success ops. I chose to make this separate from customer success ops because of a few reasons. One was that, first of all three of these groups on the left-hand side, the customer-facing group, offer a service of some type. So that's why we actually don't have a professional services department at Gainsight. All of our groups offer a service of some type. And again, we wanted to start with what need are we solving, not whether we're offering a service or not. That's not what defines the department. And secondly, I wanted services operations to be the primary group thinking about how are we really, coming up with better pricing, better packaging, better internal operations to ensure that we're meeting our revenue and cost goals. So in other words, customer success ops thinks about how do we scale up the client experience, and services ops says how do we do that in a cost-effective way so that our CFO doesn't get too angry with me. All right, so that was the first iteration of our organizational structure. But several months later, as a company, we said, you know what, we're selling to many different types of customers now. So we want to make sure that, first of all, in customer success, we're addressing those different types of customers differently because their needs actually vary a bit. And secondly, we wanted to ensure that the definition of a customer segment was consistent all the way across our company, from our product team, our marketing team, to sales, and to customer success. So here's how we took our customer segmentation and mapped it to our org structure. We have three different customer segments, which is true for many companies that we've been in touch with. One of them is high touch. These are our enterprise customers, big logos like Cisco, GE, IBM. They require us to be on site a lot, lots of sort of close interactions. Our mid-touch segment, our enterprise segment, involves higher account ratios for our customer success team, and we need to make sure in these cases that we're tracking strong processes across all the higher volume of clients, right? And then finally, we've got the low touch segment where, so-called tech touch strategy or, automated emails and other sorts of scalable programs become particularly impactful. So in order to map to these three segments, we needed a couple things. One was we needed segment leadership. I wanted to have someone reporting to me who was really thinking about what do high-touch customers need across the life cycle, across lots of different functions. But we also needed horizontal leadership because you don't want to recreate the wheel in each of your three segments if it turns out actually there's certain commonalities across the segments, which there almost inevitably will be if you're creating a scalable company, right? So we needed both to optimize for the life cycle and also optimize for consistency across the segments. And therefore, what we did was we grouped client outcomes, our CSMs, and our onboarding folks into each segment. And each of those, so that cluster of folks would report into a segment leader. So I now have a high-touch segment leader. We call them head of strategic customer success. I have a head of enterprise customer success, which is mid-touch, and a head of emerging customer success, which is our low-touch business. Now, I put account executives in parentheses here because we wanted to make sure that we were mapping back to the structure in sales as well, because sales, as part of this company-wide initiative, adopted the same definition of the segment. This has been amazingly impactful because whenever there is an issue that's cross-functional between sales and client outcomes or onboarding, I am able to delegate responsibility for resolving that issue to my customer success leader and the sales leader who is that person's peer on the sales side. They're able to work out problems themselves, without having to come to me every single time. So this has created our more scalable management structure. And then finally, technical success and my two operations groups work across all of these segments to optimize for consistency. Okay. So how do you go about designing an organizational structure, in a sort of more universal way? So the case study I provided you may not be universally applicable, but what might be a more universally applicable framework? I think that there being a few critical components of an organizational charter. First of all, it's imperative to design the mission of the function. Secondly, to define operating metrics that define success for that function. Third, identifying a cost metric that determines how should you go budget for this function. When you have a conversation with your CFO, how do you actually explain, what costs are, you're aiming to invest. Fourth, activities that allow the function to achieve its mission. Fifth, risks to the mission that the function needs to manage. And then finally, you need to clarify dependencies of that function on other teams. Well, I'll walk through each one. On the mission, I mentioned this already, but I think it's important here to address a need that the customer has, not a need that your company has, right? If we're really going to be true to customer success, we should organize ourselves effectively to support them. And by the way, if you can't clarify the mission in one sentence, you probably need to think a little bit harder about what is how do we really crystallize the mission for that group? Because it's got to be clear to you internally, and it's got to be clear to the customer. On operating metrics, I'd say the vast majority of these are not going to be financial metrics. But at the same time, it's not enough to track day-to-day activities. You sort of need something that's in the middle of these long-term financial outcomes you're aiming for, like renewal rate, but not so granular as activities. So here's what I would say. Choose operational metrics that, first of all, are predictive of the ultimate financial outcomes you're aiming for. What actually predicts whether a customer is likely to renew with you? Second, they should help determine whether those day-to-day granular activities that you're doing are actually impactful, right? How do you know whether the 20 calls you had last week made a real difference? And third, choose metrics that are important from the perspective of your CEO with maybe a little education from you, because they may not be a customer success expert. But the idea is you should be able to report these things to your CEO, perhaps in a weekly executive team meeting, and there should be a part of the board deck that captures these things. And by the way, I'll talk more about operational metrics in a bit. On the cost side, the point here is to help determine whether your current investment in this function is reasonable. Now, I would say as a caveat, make sure that you're giving yourself a little bit of freedom to allocate costs flexibly. For example, I might be under budget in customer success and client outcomes in our case. But maybe actually that's okay because I want to invest more in support, which has been incredibly effective, and for whatever reason, this year is going to make a big difference for our scalability. So I think it's okay to say, look, we're going to figure out how to shift these dollars around to create an optimal client experience. Now, you might have to educate your finance team a bit about that, but I think if we're really pushing the envelope, we should think about that flexibility. The second caveat I'll make is that some teams don't precisely lend themselves to cost metrics. For example, CS Ops is more like capital expenditure. It's more like an R&D investment because when you invest in Ops, that's really what's going to create the scalable processes that prevent you from having to hire five more people in a few months, right? In the same way that investing in your product helps fill the gaps that perhaps you have 10 people on your team focused on filling right now. So like product, investing in customer success ops is like an R&D investment. So I would think about how much you're willing to invest for the long term. But I think one rule of thumb would be consider your first CS ops hire once you have about 5 CSMs. That's the point where you're going to want to ensure a lot of consistency and invest so that you don't have to hire too many people in the next couple quarters. When determining the activities of a function, I would say document exactly what you expect each role to do. And one exercise I found helpful for this is doing a time analysis of each role. Ask folks to sit down and put in a Google spreadsheet how much time are they spending on each of their activities. And what you might find is that actually there are multiple functions that are doing the same thing. Maybe your support team is doing some things that you expect your CSMs to do, right? So this time analysis should highlight some overlaps, but also gaps between functions. Are there certain activities you want folks to do that no one is doing? Think about the risks that a function should manage. These are all the things that can go wrong as you try to achieve your mission. And I'll call out, although we often think of managing risk and client relationships as being a CSM-type activity, non-CSM departments manage risks too. If a particular client has 3 open support tickets and all of them are urgent, I think it's important to assign responsibility for thinking about that overall risky situation to your support team. I think this is lastly, it's important to identify the dependencies that a given function has on another team. So ask each function, what do you expect other functions to do in order to help you achieve your own mission, right? And that what you do is you add one function's approved dependencies, provided you've approved them, to function B's list of activities. That way, every function is really clear on how they need to support other functions. You don't have to be in a situation where function A is nagging function B to do certain things. It's clear to everybody that it's just a part of function B's job. So in summary, here's a charter template that you can use for each function to define mission, operating metrics, cost metrics, activities, risks, and dependencies. And you could even publish this internally to your entire organization, share it with other functions like sales, help them understand. And maybe you even want to publish it on your website. We have a very transparent culture. I publish most things that I do with my team on my blog, and it helps our customers understand how we work to support them. Next step, how do we define the ROI of customer success? So I think we need to start out with what's the role of a customer success manager, which in our case is part of that client outcomes department. I'll start from the beginning. When new ARR comes in the door, a new customer comes in, usually the CSM starts out by managing risk. They're reacting to crises that come up, and they're helping to turn around customers. From there, they help to drive adoption among customers of your product or service. This is where a lot of customer success teams, especially ones that are evolving out of support, are really focused. They're trying to think, how do I be more proactive, right? Get out of firefighting mode and get ahead of the problem. Some of the most advanced customer success teams are taking that to the next level, and they're saying, well, it's not just adoption that matters. Really, we want to make sure that customers are getting value from our product or service. Adoption might lead to value, hopefully does, but perhaps there's some forms of adoption that are better than others, and probably there's certain things that we need to do if we have value as our end goal, not just adoption. We see many customer success teams taking on the challenger approach, which you might know is something that's particularly popular in the sales world. So I'm stealing that concept from sales here. This is where you, in a diplomatic way and with good intentions, challenge the customer on assumptions that they might have that are getting in the way of them, bringing their business to the next level. Because I think the belief here is that it's by challenging your customers that you help them realize how to take their business, in the right direction and get value from your product or service. So if you're doing these three things, you're managing risk, you're driving adoption, and you're demonstrating value, the renewal should come from that in a pretty predictable way. But the most advanced customer success teams don't just stop at the renewal. They think, how can I translate all the value that my customer has been getting into new ARR, whether it's in the form of upsell or advocacy, which can contribute to prospective customers buying your product. So in particular, CSMs are increasingly focused on making their customers referenceable. In other words, connecting them with prospective customers that might need some additional reassurance before they buy your product or service, working on case studies with their customers, encouraging their customers to generate referrals. There are a bunch of different advocacy activities here, which I'll describe in a bit. And then secondly, CSMs, if they're smart and really aligned with your sales team in a good way, will, often over the course of a call with a client, notice that there might be some additional value that the client could be getting if the client had a certain product add-on or if some other department at their company was also using your product or service, because perhaps they could collaborate better with that other department. If a situation like this comes up, a CSM might naturally, go talk to their corresponding account executive on the sales team and say, hey, I think there might be an upsell opportunity at this client. Let me create an opportunity for you. And in that way, CSMs are ultimately contributing to the beginning of the cycle again. They're going back to generating new ARR. If you can get this cycle to work very efficiently through your customer success team, you can reduce your cost of new ARR acquisition and thereby drive up your valuation very quickly and at low cost. That's how you drive up your valuation. You grow very fast, but at low cost. And I think the customer success manager can be pivotal in that cycle. So what does this mean for how to quantify the impact of the CSM role? Well, in many organizations, and the ones I've been describing have been this way, customer success doesn't actually own a transaction. They may not, although they do in some businesses. In others, they may not actually own the renewal. They may not have an upsell quota. So in those situations, how do you make sure that you're demonstrating that your CSM team is adding a lot of value? The way that we do it is we look at certain leading indicators of those ultimate financial outcomes. If you think of there being three types of revenue, there's more retained revenue, there's expansion revenue, and there's land revenue or new business. We can identify leading indicators of each of those and hold our CSMs accountable for those things. Under the retain section, there are two leading indicators here. One is a CSM save, which means turning around a customer. You're turning them from some red state, a crisis state, to some yellow state or kind of a medium state. And this is sort of the reactive CSM that probably a lot of us are familiar with. Those are very important, right? Now, beyond resolving crises, we want to be proactive and get customers to achieve some sort of victory with us. So there's probably some notion of a CSM win where you get them from that yellow state to that green state. Now, keep this traffic light analogy in mind. I'm going to come back with some examples of how you can actually define what a win looks like. On the expansion side, we talked about CSMs teeing up opportunities for sales to go upsell. We call those CSQLs, or CSM qualified leads. So we can track the volume of those that each CSM is generating. Then under the land column, there are two ways that CSMs can contribute here. One is by generating advocacy from their customers through one of the tactics I've listed here. We talked about references. A client can contribute a testimonial about the value they've been getting. A client can speak at an event that prospective customers might be attending. They can refer a prospective customer, or perhaps they switch companies and they were an advocate at the previous company that bought your product, but at the new company, perhaps that product hasn't been bought yet. So if they buy there, we call that a repeat purchaser. Finally, CSMs can contribute to new business by actually participating themselves in the sales cycle. They can, lots of account executives love to bring in CSMs into prospect meetings because the CSM doesn't have a target and can speak authentically about what the experience post-sale will look like, thereby helping to drive up close rates. Now, in our business at Gainsight, our CSMs are bonused based on these leading indicators. They have a target, an individual target, for number of wins, CSM wins that they generate for their customers every quarter, the number of customers that they move from yellow to green, that's one. The second component of their bonus structure is the number of CSQLs that they generate. And the third target is the number of CSQAs that they generate. So in this way, we're able to align customer success, first of all, to what sales is trying to accomplish by teeing up customers for these three types of revenue outcomes. But secondly, because each of these three metrics is a good proxy for whether the customer is getting value, we're also aligning the CSM with the customer. If customers are winning at a faster rate, if they are saying, hey, I like your product so much that I want this other department to be using it, and if they're going out and advocating on behalf of your product to prospective customers, chances are they are getting a lot of value, and your CSM is a big part of that. So this is the final section. How do we track the ROI of customer success? Given this framework, how do we go about actually measuring it? I'll give you a few examples. First, under CSM saves, how do we track this? Well, we have 8 different types of risks that our customers might experience. Now, we tend to see these 8 risk categories across many of the companies that we work with. These tend to be pretty consistent, but they're not always the same. Also, sometimes we see customers, adopt other forms of risk that are particularly relevant for them, and we actually over time have built out the number of risks that we track. But we see these as being the 8 most common ones. Now, for each of these categories, which I won't go through all of them, but you can read them and maybe even take a screenshot, and we'll also send the deck out afterwards. For each of these 8 categories, a customer can be in a red state, a yellow state, or a green state. Taking support as an example, a customer might be in a red state if there are, those 3 open tickets that have been open for 3 weeks and each of them is in an urgent state, right? That might be red. The customer might be in yellow if, maybe they have like 1 support ticket that's particularly urgent. And they might be in green if they have, only a couple support tickets open that signal that they're engaged rather than unhappy, right? And we have similar definitions for, the other categories. We then track, each of those 8 categories in a chart that looks like this, where for each of those 8 dimensions, a customer can be, in a red state, a green state, or a yellow state. Now, besides tracking, customer risk in terms of these sort of what we call scorecard measures, we'll also track we'll also generate certain calls to action for the CSM to address those risky situations. And we have certain playbooks, of course, in our own product, that help the CSM understand how do I go about resolving this crisis in a way that, takes into account all the other times that we've dealt with a similar situation so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, the final example I'll walk you through is how we track CSM wins, right? So the key to a win is you want to develop a repeatable methodology for bringing customers to some state of victory. I'm going to use, again, borrow a sales concept called predictable revenue, which you might have read about in Aaron Ross's book. Aaron Ross built out the sales development team at Salesforce. Now, he talks about a methodology for predictably achieving new business ARR through a cold calling team. And, you know that they'll be able to predictably generate closed business if they're achieving a certain consistent rate of sales qualified leads. In other words, they're able to get enough people on the phone and they're able to convert those phone calls into, an agreement by that prospective customer to talk to an account executive. And they've qualified them in, so SQL. Now, by analogy, we want to achieve predictable value delivery and customer success. We want to predictably achieve a certain gross renewal rate, and we want to predictably achieve a certain form of green adoption to get us there. Now, how do we actually do that? Internally at Gainsight, we've actually codified all the different business challenges that we see our customers tending to have. So you're seeing, a list of them here. And in using this framework, we're able to identify, even very early in the sales cycle, what is the customer seeking to accomplish with our product. And then we use those same objectives in the customer success world, in our onboarding world, to achieve those outcomes. We actually track the business objectives that each customer wants to achieve in what we call a success plan. Now, ultimately, what we expect to achieve through this process is what I referred to earlier as being a win. We have 5 different levels of what we call habits for our customers. We call it habits because we're trying to inculcate good habits in our customers, which we believe will signal that they're transforming the way they work and therefore getting value from our product. So we've got, this deep green color, we've got light green, we've got yellow, orange, and red. Each of those is a different level of adoption, with green being the stickiest, where they're getting the most value, and red meaning, they're not really using the product at all. We actually track these different levels in an objective way by looking at our customers' adoption. For green, we're actually trying to see them using a particular part of our product that we know if they're using it in a robust way, they're transforming the way they work, right? Now, this chart in particular actually shows the split across all of our customers and across all of those levels for each customer cohort. So the first column is customers that signed up about like a year and a half ago. The next column is customers that signed up a quarter after that, and then a quarter after that, and then a quarter after that for the rightmost column. And then for each of these, it shows what's the percentage of customers who ended up in that green category or some other category within 6 months from now. So looked at the split of adoption within 6 months of customers signing up with us. I showed a slide very similar to this at a board meeting a few weeks ago, and what we were able to show was that quarter over quarter, a greater percentage of customers end up in that green category 6 months after signing up, which means that we're getting a lot better at delivering value to our customers. I found this to be an incredibly impactful slide in a board context because it shows so visually that customers are increasingly happy as a result of the activities that we're doing with them. So I've shared a lot of information with you guys today, ranging from how do you structure your organization to how do we actually measure whether this organization is impactful. And with that, I'd love to open it up to questions.
Fantastic. Sorry, I was just on mute there. We do have a couple of questions that I want to highlight for you, and I thank you for taking us through that. One of the first ones that I wanted to raise here was actually the concept of like these rapidly growing teams. So, the question we got was, my team's growing quickly, and I've had to sort of shuffle accounts between different members of my team as we brought new team members on. So wondering if you have any advice around how you maintain consistency for your customer base and make sure you're, providing a great experience as that team expands rapidly.
It's a great question, and this is a really common problem for fast-growing companies. I mean, especially when you're reorganizing, you're defining new customer segments, you might have to shift customers around in order to, achieve the integrity of your function or the integrity of the segment. And certainly as CSMs get promoted, that's another reason why you might have to shift customers around. And customers naturally really don't like that because they get used to trusting somebody who, they believe really understands their business. So I agree, first of all, it's a problem. It's good to try to limit the number of transitions that you make. And I do think that, even when you have to make transitions, there are a few ways that you can ensure it goes smoothly. One is to really keep a record of all of your interactions with the customer and all the knowledge that you've gained along the way. There's got to be some sort of knowledge management system where you track everything from what were the customer's business objectives to what was the agenda for that last call and what did we decide that we would do to, what are the emails that we've sent them lately, All of that should be tracked so that when a new CSM comes in, they're not just relying on a 30-minute handoff call to get up to speed on what the customer's doing.
And that actually leads me to one other question that came in here around technology. And so, you've obviously built this team out. You work for a company that's in the space. Are there any hot technology or any kind of key technology that you use in easing the work of your team or prioritizing or managing the group? Anything you'd encourage people to take a look at?
Yeah. Well, I guess this is where I'll plug our own software. Because certainly we use our own software for all this. And actually, although I tried to minimize as much as possible this presentation being a sales pitch, I did use some screenshots from our own product. So as you guys saw, graphs along the way and workflows, that's coming from actually our own instance of Gainsight because we do try to eat our own dog food. So, what we do with our product is it does function as our knowledge management system. So it helps us track all sorts of behaviors and interactions that we have with our clients. Helps us report on all the operational metrics that I mentioned. And probably, really important part of this is it allows us to coordinate cross-functionally within our post-sales team as well as with sales and other departments.
Fantastic. Well, Allison, I want to thank you for your time today, and thank you all to the audience for attending. I hope you're able to bring some of these ideas back to your own team and company. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to go ahead and send out this deck and the recording. And if any other questions come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to facilitate getting those answered. We're also working on finalizing our webinar schedule for 2017, so please keep an eye out, and we look forward to having you join us next year. Thank you.